is de Gaudeamus Muziekweek. En aangeschoven aan tafel is een van de leden van de jury en componist Christopher Butterfield. Christopher, welcome to the webcast. I'm very happy to have you here. How do you like your stay so far?
It's very comfortable.
Yeah.
I don't have a moment. I do have a moment to rest, but what's great is that there's so much going on that I don't ever have to worry about what to do next. There's always new pleasures around the corner.
Yes,
you know,
yes.
So.
You're a member of the jury, but that's not your only occupation in the Netherlands, right? Because you're also involved in the Young Composers meeting in Apeldoorn.
I was very, very lucky to be invited to be part of that, and at the same time, you know, then being part of Gaudeamus as well. And what has been actually a real treat is to be here and to meet so many of the composers who were at the VPRO Prize. And I hadn't expected that, and so it was a real pleasure to be able to encounter those people again. What I like about both these things, the VPRO Prize and Gaudeamus both, is how they bring people together. And that, I think, a prize is a wonderful thing to have. Fine, anybody can get a prize, but the real prize is to find yourself in a new community of artists, and to be able to meet, to be able to talk, to be able to discover interests held in common or not, and then to be able to go on with a new network. And then for that, there is no value you can put on that. It's just the best thing that can happen. So
I think Martijn Padding said a couple of days ago, the real prize is for the music, not for a composer. I think the sharing the music is what is happening here, isn't it?
Oh yeah. And again, I mean, this is the wonderful thing about coming to Holland, where there's so much importance is given to festivals and to the development of the art. You know, not just the history of the art, but the development of the art as well.
Is that so much different from Canada, where there's also a very lively new music scene, isn't it?
There is, but Canada is a very odd kind of country, because it's everybody knows that it's a very big place. I actually don't see it that way. I see it as a very small place, because it's made up of a few cities, not very big, that are very far apart from each other. And you know, if I wanted to go to a festival in Toronto, I can't just jump on the train and go half an hour to Utrecht. I have to get on a plane and fly in 5 hours to Montreal. You know, and my son actually just took a train across the country from Vancouver to Toronto. It took him 4 days.
Oh yeah.
So you know, we don't have the same connections, perhaps, and it changes because media changes. You know, the radio no longer has the central part in that kind of diffusion of musical culture that it used to, and of course with the internet, you know, all bets are off. You just don't know how new systems are going to form themselves. You know, it's possible maybe at the same time to say that people know more about what's happening in the musical world now than they ever did before. But in a funny way, they might know less about their local culture. You know, so Canada is a rather odd place in that sense. You know.
Even an internet community can be small. Though spread over the whole world, but still being small.
And so, I mean, I never see people talk about hopeless situations in culture, but I think what they are usually talking about is being worried about what's going to happen next, and being not sure, you know, what that's going to be. but because it's funny, once people have a taste for culture, it's rather hard to get rid of it.
Is it?
I'm talking about Canada more than Europe, where in Europe it's just a given, you know.
Yeah, but it's threatened as well.
I know, I know, yeah. but it's not that people will go without it. They won't. They'll find ways to make it happen. At least that's my. I may be always seeing, the silver lining on the cloud, but culture I always see is a transformative thing. It's not something that's fixed and you couldn't sort of determine how it goes.
I think even in terrible situations such as in some countries in the Middle East where making music was forbidden or is forbidden, still then people will hide their instruments and they'll start playing as soon as the police or whatever it is gone. So there's probably something deep inside which will survive.
People will continue to make films, but they'll be put in jail. Okay, the film will exist, and they will prevail. It has to. It's hope. It's always hope. So.
Is that something you see in the generation of composers which we meet now in the Music Week as well? Is it alive? Is it alive and kicking, so to speak?
The simple fact that people want to create music, to me, is the whole story. And I think when you're young, you don't give much of a thought to to the sort of structural business. Yes, it would be nice to have your piece played, by some ensemble, some famous ensemble or something like that. But that's not the only way to do it, And I remember a few years ago, of course, for the arts that aren't popular, we have foundations and agencies that we can apply to for money, and always and for my generation, this was of course what you did. You applied to the Canada Council, and if you were lucky, you got some money, and if you didn't, But I remember talking to a young woman who was a student of mine several years ago, and she wanted to do these projects, voice electronics, and I said, well, you should really apply for a grant. And she said, why would I do that? I said, well, it's always useful to have some money. And she said, well, I don't really, I'll do it anyway. It's not a problem, And I thought in that moment, what we're dealing with here is almost a kind of a folk music. It's a music you do to occupy yourself. Why would I go through all these hoops to try and find if it's any good or not, or blah blah, and give my scores, and I'll just do it. I'll go into the local arts place and I'll reserve a space, and I'll make a date, and I'll put it together and rehearse it, and it'll be done, and so in that moment I thought, it's all going to happen regardless, and now a lot of we've been talking with the composers all week, and for 2 hours every morning, and there's quite a lot of discussion about that really the best way now for composers is to really find a kind of core of sympathetic musicians, and don't wait for somebody else to do your piece, and that group might not be there anymore because its funding was just cut. You make your own group. You teach them, literally. You teach them to play your music, to find the idiom that works best, and you make concerts, and it's funny. For years I played in a rock band in Toronto, and. It's no different. We of course we wanted to be world famous rock stars, but it never happened for 1 second. It didn't matter. You start out and you print the posters and you put them up and you rehearse how you can, and you get a gig in some bar somewhere, and you go and play. And there are 6 people there, and 5 of them are your friends, and one guy is a drunk who came in off the street. But that's all right. You do it anyway. How else are you going to learn how to do this? I don't see it as being much different in a certain way.
So it's much more like it's been done for the last half century or something like that in rock and roll, and we're getting rid of structures.
In a
some
certain way, it
structures.
may be that that's what's happening.
Yes.
You know, it may be that that's what's happening. And there's the standard of young musicians now, it seems to me, is higher than when I was a student. We all know that playing higher, louder, faster, doesn't necessarily make you a better musician, but you might be able to do certain things that composers are thinking about now a little easier. Also, I think that with younger players now, and I know that this is the case in Holland, in Canada, it depends, not so much, but there's a desire to become involved with, your peers, your colleagues, to be involved with that music, and it's very much alive, I think, and so even though it's a kind of, I know because this is all I hear from my, the people I meet in Holland, it's not a good situation. I mean, it's actually a situation that couldn't even exist in Canada, because when I hear about the kinds of cuts that are making, from a substantial amount of money, like much more than we would have, for example, in Canada, to nothing, that couldn't exist. I mean, politically, legally, it couldn't exist. You would have to reinvent a whole series of laws, to basically make it exist. So in that sense, maybe we would protect it a little bit, but then we didn't have so much to begin with. So, whereas you were here, and now it's like, whoa, we're sort of here, but it just kind of goes like this.
Yeah.
And I mean, in Canada, it's again, it's a difficult thing to compare with Europe, because it's just such the conditions are utterly different. It's a colonial society. It's a colonized society, and the idea of it, sort of producing art in any sense is a recent idea. I would say it's even almost as a post-war idea. It's my generation.
Really,
that early.
recent.
And I mean, some people would argue a little bit with that, but there's very little you can point to. In painting, yes, all right, there's a very, very strong group of painters in central Canada in the early years of the 20th century. There's a very interesting man from Quebec who spent most of his time in Europe as a kind of post-impressionist. Musically, there's almost nothing. There are some people who adhere to, I mean, there's no modernist school whatsoever, right, whatsoever. There may be people who tend towards a Debussy, or towards a kind of, post-Elgar, kind of idea, but it simply has nothing in common with what was happening between 1907 and 1945. It just doesn't. So after the war is when there's suddenly the kind of international contacts and the ability to travel more, and the fact that world that was so locked up from 1930 onwards to the end of the war, it suddenly is loosed and it floods in everywhere. So really before me there's my father's generation, and that's it. And then there's me, and then now there are other generations coming, and the amazing thing is that it grows exponentially. Is that once you let the cat out of the bag,
there's no stopping.
There's no stopping it. And so in that sense, it gets better and better. But the thing, of course, that makes it complicated is distance, because we don't have the ease of the density. The density. Canada is the opposite of dense.
Going back to the development you mentioned earlier, in the youngest generation, say the kids who were born in the 80s, who are now starting to form their own band and just start and play. Do you see, as a result of that development, also a change in the music itself? Is it different from, say, what was composed 20 or 30 or 40 years ago? Is it lighter, or is it...
maybe it's my own what I want to hear. But to me, the most successful music seems maybe a little bit more playful. It doesn't deal so much with the great serious issues of structure and it might be a little easier to apprehend, and I don't want to say accessible, because we have no audience for any kind of contemporary music in the country at all. It's a very small audience wherever you are, and yes, that may be true almost anywhere, but at home it really is true. But I think that and it may be economics that say that you actually can't do a very complex kind of music because you don't have the time or the money to rehearse it and put it together. I think that cheap computers and sound equipment has changed the game an enormous amount, because where once before you wouldn't have available all these very sophisticated instruments at your disposal, on the computer to play with sound, and that's changed things a great deal. I think there's a lot more improvisation maybe than there used to be, or a desire to do that. But of course the thing that I find now, this is a very curious thing, because I also teach in visual arts as well. I teach in art school as well. That I find when I'm doing sort of workshops with people, I find, yes, well, I have this, what do you do? Well, I have this sort of electronic improvisation group, but really what I'm interested in is finding out ways to notate this.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'd like to know how I can isolate this particular thing and then move to this thing and say, okay, now we start, talking about how we make things, some documenting, some notation for events in sound and how they take place in time. And that's a very curious idea, because it means that you're almost starting from scratch all over again. You had a musical impulse. You weren't a trained musician or anything, but you'd like to be able to do it again,
Yeah.
And that's a great idea.
Well, maybe that is some sort of a result of, let's say, rock and roll culture, where of course the sound is the starting point and end of what it's about. It's just about sound and playing with it.
But how interesting, I don't know how it is for you, but all the most famous pop songs, and I'm thinking about English American pop music, that's my culture, so you can play about a third of a second of it and I will know what that song is if it was a major hit. So if I want to say, all right, how do I recreate the sound of instruments, or recreate in some way as close as possible the sound in the Beach Boys' Good Vibrations. How do I do that? Was that written down and do it? No,
it wasn't. No.
I can attempt to go to this artifact, this artifact, and sort of, maybe the cello, kind of bass rhythm, or the theremin or whatever. I can try and do that, but it's going to be awfully hard to do that, because I have no notation of that, So
maybe just one more question, if you allow me, before you have to go into the next appointment, of course. I believe you're working on a string trio right now.
How did you know that?
It was because it was in the information text on the Gaudeamus website. And it's called Madame Wu Set.
Yes.
Am I correct?
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be a very, very long piece of work. Could you tell us a bit more about it?
Oh boy.
If you want.
I'd love to. We'd be here for the next hour. It's very long. It's for a piano trio, violin, cello, piano. It came. I asked a trio if they would be interested, and they said, "Yeah, we'll do that." So I said, "Okay, fine." its basic structural sort of principle is that and this is a very dumb idea, and it's not really one you need to know about for if you're listening. There are 351 or 50 possible combinations of intervals using all 12 pitches of the chromatic scale. 351 with all 12 notes, and then one silence. So there's 352 possible conditions, right? So the basic structural idea is to make a piece based on each one of these interval combinations. And it has a predecessor. It has a kind of a prelude, if you like, which was that I took 2 books, and this is the reason why it's called Madame Wu said. I took 2 books that I like very much. They're sort of romance novels about China, written by Westerners. And for 8 months, I spent an hour every day writing by hand a sentence from each novel. So the 2 novels were like this.
Yes,
right?
they were.
Sentence 1, book A, sentence 1. Book B, sentence 2, 1. Book A, sentence 2. Book B, sentence 2. Book A, and I simply made the stories go like this, right? And one novel is 2.5 times as long as the other. So when we got to the end, we started again with the one, right? And we got to the end of the final one. So it took me 8 months every day for 1 hour to write 1 page from each of these books, and it was a discipline. It was a discipline. My hand got very like this.
Strong.
And then I made a recording of this whole new story, which takes about 27 hours
to read.
You see. And then it was an installation in an art gallery where I took all the pages. There were 603 pages, and put them all up in a nice organization on the wall. They were yellow sheets of paper. I like to remember that yellow is the imperial color in China. It's the emperor's color. So these are happy accidents, though. This is just I didn't, But so this ran for 6 weeks with the story just repeating over and over and over again. So if you walked in, and it's a kind of endless nonsense which seems to refer to itself but never quite gets there, unless you spend long enough listening that you might be able to. I don't want you to hear 2 different stories. I would much rather you heard sort of merging, you see. The central character is in one of these books is named Madame Wu. And one of the things that the writer would always say was Madame Wu said. And so I just said, this is what comes out of this first one. And the first book was called Pavilion of Women by Pearl S. Buck. And the other book was called The Maker of Heavenly Trousers by Daniele Varre, who was an Italian diplomat who lived in Beijing, in Peking 100 years ago. And so that first piece was called the Pavilion of Heavenly Trousers, because I just put them together like this. And so the second one, part 2, is now Madame Wu said. And so I originally thought I'll spend an hour every day writing a minute of music. That never happened.
No. Instead you wrote sentence after sentence after sentence.
Well, no, somehow I still haven't found a way to find a discipline for writing all these 350 sections. I've written 79 of them, and we had a concert actually of everything that existed so far, which lasted for about 12 hours, because each piece was about 2 minutes long, 2-3 minutes long, but then there was 6 minutes of silence. And then there are duos and trios and solos and so it's not that people are playing the entire time. They can't physically do that, They might play for an hour and a half and then rest for 4 hours, But where this music sits as something for an audience, I really don't know. It may have more in common with some kind of piece for an art gallery, but I'm very happy working in between these places.
It may be reminiscent of the Vexation by Satie, but it's totally different. Because that is repeating the same.
That's repeating the same thing, the
over and
same
over
17 bars over and over and over again. And I won't say that it isn't connected to that idea, because
But maybe you're right. Indeed, it is.
We did the first performance of that piece in Canada in 1973 when I was a student. How could it not have an effect?
Yeah.
I think that's the world that it's probably part of.
Yeah. Yeah.
But as you say, different in its conditions.
Yes. Yes. And it's rather about experiencing it in its length than.
If you desired to, yes. The funny thing from my point of view is that I never wrote 3.5, because so far there exists 3.5 hours of music.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I've never written 3.5 hours of music before, and I don't remember most of it.
Mm-hmm.
So when I go and look at it every now and again, I'm completely shocked. Because I don't have any, I've written pieces that are, I don't know, hour and a half, and but something that lasts for 3.5 hours, and that's only a fifth. It's crazy. So with luck, I'll have enough music to last me the rest of my life. When I finally finish. So, but it's going to. As I say, I haven't found a discipline yet to make me finish the rest of it, and I need to get on the program because time is going by quickly.
Yes.
So
are you going to have a hard time tomorrow as a jury for the Gaudeamus Prize?
Oh, I don't know that I should say anything.
Okay.
I think the most important thing is, to all of us, Martijn and Annie and me, is that we put together what we thought was going to be a very interesting and good concert.
Yes.
And that's kind of where it's at. Everything is. And there might be something that comes out of it that we say, well, this one is. But I think there's still some more music to hear. There's still 4 more pieces, and I'm not saying that we've heard the whole thing by any means. But I think it's very good, the discussion between the 3 of us, because we keep ourselves up to date on everything, and talk pretty. We look at things, pretty seriously, I think. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to hearing the results on Sunday.
Yeah.
And we're looking forward to the concerts tonight and tomorrow as well. Christopher, thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.